I left the highway just after sunset because the GPS told me to, which already felt like a mistake. The route had been clean all afternoon. Blue line, steady miles, nothing strange. Then, about 20 minutes outside of a town I'd never heard of, the map flickered and rerouted me onto a narrow county road that didn't even have a name, just a thin gray vein cutting through forest. I remember hesitating at the turn, engine idling, watching the last of the daylight slip behind the trees. It would have been easy to stay on the highway. It would have been smarter. But the ETA dropped by 30 minutes, and I had been driving for 9 hours straight. 30 minutes felt like a gift, so I turned. The road tightened almost immediately. Asphalt gave way to cracked pavement, then to something that looked like it had been repaired too many times by too many different people. The trees leaned in closer the deeper I went, tall and thin, their branches threading together overhead, until the sky became a narrow strip of fading gray. My headlights felt weaker out there, like they weren't reaching as far as they should. I kept checking the GPS, expecting it to correct itself, to tell me to turn around. It didn't, just a straight line forward. About 10 minutes in, I lost signal. Not gradually, not one bar at a time, it just dropped to nothing, like someone had flipped a switch. The map froze. My location marker stopped moving. I tapped the screen, zoomed in, zoomed out, nothing. The road ahead bent slightly to the left, and for a second, I considered turning around right there. But the trees behind me already looked identical to the ones ahead, and the idea of retracing my path in that tunnel of dark felt worse than continuing. So I kept going. Another 5 minutes passed before I saw the light. It wasn't bright, just a faint, steady glow, off to the right, somewhere between the trees. At first I thought it was a reflection, maybe another car through the woods, but it didn't move. It held its place, warm and yellow against the deepening blue of the forest. I slowed down, easing my foot off the gas, letting the car roll forward until the source came into view. A cabin, small, single story, set back maybe 30 yards from the road. There was no driveway, just a break in the trees where the ground had been flattened enough for a vehicle to pass. One window was lit. The rest of it sat in shadow, edges softened by the surrounding dark. It didn't look abandoned, but it didn't look lived in either. It looked paused, like it was waiting for something. I checked the GPS again out of habit. Still frozen. I told myself I'd just ask for directions. That was the decision. Simple, practical, temporary. I turned the wheel and eased off the road. The ground was uneven, soft in places, the tires crunching over gravel and something else I couldn't quite identify. The headlights swept across the front of the cabin as I pulled closer, and for a brief moment, the whole structure came into sharp relief. Wood siding, weathered but intact, a narrow porch with 2 steps, a door painted a dull, peeling red. No car outside, no movement in the window. I parked about 10 feet from the porch and killed the engine. The sudden silence pressed in immediately, thick and complete. No distant traffic, no insects, not even wind. Just the ticking of my engine cooling down. I sat there longer than I meant to, hands resting on the steering wheel, looking at the lit window. Something about it felt wrong. Not in a dramatic way. Nothing jumped out. It was just steady. Too steady. The light didn't flicker. It didn't shift. It was like a picture of a light instead of an actual one. I almost left. That's the part I keep coming back to. I could have just started the car and gone back to the road, figured something else out. But I had already turned in. Already committed, in a small way. And once you make one decision like that, the next one comes easier. I grabbed my phone out of the cup holder, out of habit more than anything, and checked it again. No signal. I opened the door. The cold hit first, not sharp, not biting, just present. A steady, dry cold that didn't feel tied to the weather, so much as the place itself. Gravel shifted under my shoes as I stepped out, the sound louder than it should have been in the quiet. I walked toward the porch. Each step felt like it took longer than the last, the cabin growing larger in my vision, but not any more detailed. The shadows stayed where they were. A light in the window stayed exactly the same. When I reached the bottom step, I noticed the paper. It was taped to the door at eye level, plain white, edges curling slightly, typed text, centered, clean. I stopped. For a second I didn't read it. I just looked at it, aware of the silence around me, the stillness of the trees, the way the light behind the window didn't change, no matter how long I stood there. Then I leaned in. The title at the top was simple: Rules for Overnight Guests. I felt something shift in my chest. Not fear exactly, not yet, just a tightening, like my body had recognized something before my mind caught up. I told myself it was a rental, a weird one maybe, remote, unusual policies, people leave instructions all the time. Still I read, Rule 1, do not knock. If the door is unlocked, you may enter. If it is locked, you must leave immediately. I glanced at the handle, without touching it. Rule 2, once inside, lock the door and do not open it again for any reason until sunrise. Rule 3, keep all lights off. Use only the lantern provided on the table. Rule 4, if you hear movement outside the cabin, do not investigate. Rule 5, if you hear 3 knocks on the door, remain silent. Rule 6, if you hear your name spoken from outside, do not respond. My eyes slowed on that one. Rule 7, do not look through the windows after midnight. Rule 8, if the lantern goes out on its own, close your eyes and count to 100 before moving. Rule 9, you may leave at sunrise, do not leave before. Rule 10, if you break a rule, do not attempt to leave, it is already too late. I finished reading and stayed there, staring at the page. No logo, no signature, no explanation, just rules. Behind me, the forest remained completely still. I became aware of how far I was from the road, how little I knew about where I was, how my phone had no signal and my GPS had frozen, and the only structure within sight was this cabin with a list of instructions that read like something between a warning and a test. I should have left. That would have been the smart move. Walk back to the car, turn around, find the main road again, even if it took longer. But the same logic that had brought me here in the first place started filling in the gaps. It's probably a joke, or a theme rental, or just someone trying to be clever. People do that. I reached for the handle. It turned easily. Unlocked. The door opened inward, without a sound. The light I had seen from the road came from a single lantern sitting on a wooden table in the center of the room. No overhead lights, no visible switches, just that one steady glow. I stepped inside. The air felt different immediately. Warmer, but not in a comforting way. More like the cold had been replaced by something neutral, controlled. The kind of temperature you'd expect in a place that didn't change much. I turned and closed the door behind me. For a moment, I hesitated with my hand on the lock. Rule 2, lock the door and do not open it again for any reason until sunrise. I told myself I wasn't staying, not really, just looking around, just getting my bearings before heading back out. Still, I slid the lock into place. It clicked louder than it should have. The click of the lock didn't echo, but it felt like it did. The kind of sound that doesn't travel through the air so much as it settles somewhere in your chest and stays there. I stood with my hands still resting on the door for a second longer than necessary, listening to the room behind me. Nothing moved. The cabin was smaller than it had looked from the outside. One main room, a narrow kitchenette along the left wall, a table at the center with the lantern, and a bed pushed against the far corner beneath a window that had been covered with thick, dark fabric from the inside. No decorations, no personal items, no signs that anyone actually lived there. It wasn't abandoned, but it wasn't occupied either. It felt maintained, like a place that existed only for use, not for living. I turned slowly, taking it in. The lantern's light was steady, almost unnaturally so. It didn't flicker or dim when I moved closer. It just held the same intensity, casting soft shadows that didn't quite behave the way I expected. Objects had outlines, but the edges seemed slightly blurred, like the light wasn't fully committing to them. I told myself I was overthinking it. That had already become a pattern. I set my phone on the table next to the lantern and tapped the screen again out of habit. Still no signal. The time was frozen at 7:42 p.m., which I knew wasn't right. I had been on that road longer than that. The battery indicator hadn't moved either. I turned it off completely and left it there. Rule 3. Keep all lights off. Use only the lantern provided on the table. I glanced around for switches anyway. There were none. No overhead fixtures, no lamps besides the lantern. Even the kitchenette had no visible lighting. Just shadows and that one central glow. Fine. I walked further into the room. The floorboards were solid. No creaking, no give. Each step felt muted, like the sound was being absorbed before it could fully form. I tested it, shifting my weight more heavily on one foot than the other. Same result. Movement without noise. That was new. I didn't like that. The bed was neatly made, white sheets pulled tight, a single pillow placed dead center. No wrinkles, no sign that anyone had used it recently. I ran a hand over the fabric without thinking. It was cool to the touch, almost cold, like it hadn't been exposed to the warmth of a body in a long time. I pulled my hand back. Just a place to stay, I said out loud, the sound of my own voice oddly flat in the room. That's all. The words didn't carry. They dropped. That was the closest way to describe it. They didn't echo or bounce or linger. They just stopped existing a few inches from where I spoke them. I swallowed and looked back at the table. The paper with the rules wasn't there. I felt a quick, sharp spike of confusion before I remembered. It had been taped to the outside of the door. I had read it out there. Still, the absence of anything written inside the cabin made the rules feel less like instructions and more like something I was supposed to remember, which meant I started repeating them in my head. Do not knock. Lock the door. No lights. Don't investigate movement. 3 knocks. Stay silent. Your name. Don't respond. Don't look through the windows after midnight. Lantern goes out. Count to 100. Leave at sunrise. Break a rule. Too late. I exhaled slowly. Okay, I said, quieter this time, more to myself than anything else. I walked over to the kitchenette. There was a sink, dry and spotless. A small cabinet with 2 plates, a single glass, and a set of utensils that looked like they had never been used. No food, no appliances, not even a refrigerator. Whoever owned this place didn't expect anyone to stay long, or didn't expect them to need anything. I turned back toward the center of the room. The lantern hadn't moved, but something about the way the shadows fell around it felt slightly different. I couldn't pinpoint how. The table was in the same place. The light was the same brightness. But the space between objects, the empty air, felt adjusted. Like the room had shifted half an inch in some direction I couldn't track. I blinked, and the feeling passed. Fatigue, I told myself. You've been driving all day. That explanation held for about 5 seconds. Then I heard it. A sound from outside. Not loud, not sudden, just present. A soft, deliberate movement, like something brushing against the exterior wall of the cabin. It started near the back, behind the bed, and moved slowly along the length of the wall toward the front door. I froze. Rule 4. If you hear movement outside the cabin, do not investigate. My eyes drifted toward the covered window above the bed. The fabric was thick, layered, heavy enough that no light passed through it from either side. It hung straight down, edges tucked tightly against the wall, leaving no gaps. The sound continued. Slow, steady, not random. It wasn't wind. It wasn't branches. It had direction, intent. The kind of movement that suggested something choosing where to go. It reached the corner near the door and stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. I became aware of my breathing. Too loud, too fast. I tried to slow it down, to match the stillness of the room, but the effort made it worse. "Probably an animal," I whispered. Again, the words went nowhere. I stayed where I was, standing near the table, eyes fixed on the door. Seconds passed, maybe a minute. Then, 3 knocks. Soft, evenly spaced, centered on the door. My entire body locked in place. Rule 5. If you hear 3 knocks on the door, remain silent. The sound itself wasn't aggressive. It wasn't someone trying to break in. It was controlled, patient, like whoever, or whatever, was on the other side had no doubt I was there, and no need to prove it. I held my breath without meaning to. 3 more knocks came. Lower this time. Not by much. Just enough to register. The pattern. It matched the rules I had memorized, but hearing it in real time was different. It wasn't just a sequence anymore. It was deliberate, like a test being performed exactly the way it had been designed. My mouth felt dry. Every instinct I had pushed toward the door. And the uncertainty. I didn't move. The silence stretched. Then the final 2 knocks came. Low, near the bottom of the door. The same pattern. Complete. I felt something cold settle along the back of my neck, not from the air, but from the realization that this wasn't random. It wasn't coincidence. It was structured, repeated, expected. The knocking stopped. No footsteps, no retreat, just absence. I stayed where I was, staring at the door, waiting for something else to happen. For a voice, for movement, for any sign that whatever had been there was gone. Nothing came. Slowly, carefully, I exhaled. My hands were shaking. I hadn't noticed when that started. "Don't respond," I whispered, more to reinforce it than anything else. Just don't respond. I stepped back from the door, putting a little more distance between me and it, and moved toward the bed. The covered window sat just above it, silent and still. Rule 7, do not look through the windows after midnight. I checked the lantern again. Still steady. Still the same. I had no way of knowing what time it was. That thought settled in deeper than I expected. No phone, no clock, no outside reference. Just the rules and whatever was following them. I sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to disturb the sheets too much, and kept my eyes on the door. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Time didn't feel consistent in that room. It stretched in some moments, collapsed in others. Without a way to measure it, everything became subjective, tied to sensation instead of seconds. At some point, I realized something else. The silence outside wasn't empty. It was occupied. Not by sound, but by presence. Like something was still there, waiting. I don't know how long I sat on the edge of that bed before I noticed the next change, but it wasn't sudden. That was the pattern with everything in that place. Nothing announced itself. It just shifted, and if you weren't paying attention, you'd miss the exact moment it happened. The lantern dimmed. Not enough to plunge the room into darkness. Just enough that the shadows deepened and the edges of objects pulled tighter into themselves. I leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed on the flame inside the glass. It hadn't gone out. It hadn't even flickered. It was still steady, just smaller. Rule 8. If the lantern goes out on its own, close your eyes and count to 100 before moving. It hadn't gone out. Not yet. Still, I felt my body react as if it had. My shoulders tensed. My breathing slowed again. Controlled this time. Deliberate. I shifted my weight carefully, easing back on the bed, so I was sitting fully, instead of half-perched, trying to minimize movement without freezing completely. The room held its shape. For a while, nothing else happened. Then I heard it again. Not the knocking. Something softer. Closer. A faint sound from just beyond the wall behind me, near the covered window. It wasn't scraping this time. It was tapping. Light. Irregular. Like fingertips brushing against wood, testing it, tracing it. I closed my eyes for a second, then opened them again, keeping my gaze fixed forward, away from the window. Rule 4. Do not investigate. The tapping continued for a few seconds, then stopped. A pause. Then it resumed, slightly lower, moving along the wall in a slow, uneven line. Not random, not quite patterned either, just exploratory. I stayed still. Every part of me wanted to turn, to look, to confirm what was making that sound. The not knowing was worse than anything I could imagine seeing. But the rules weren't suggestions. They were specific, in a way that implied consequences. And I had already heard what happened when you acknowledged something outside. My name hadn't been called yet. That thought arrived uninvited. As soon as it did, I wished it hadn't. Because now I was waiting for it. The tapping stopped again. Silence. Then, Evan. The voice came from outside the window. Not loud, not distorted, just normal. That was the worst part. It sounded like someone standing a few feet away, speaking at a conversational volume, not calling out, not shouting, just saying my name, the way someone would if they knew I was there and expected me to answer. My chest tightened instantly. Rule 6. If you hear your name spoken from outside, do not respond. I didn't. But my body reacted anyway. A reflex, automatic, the urge to reply before thought could catch up. My throat tightened like it was preparing to speak, and I had to physically press my tongue against the roof of my mouth to stop it. Evan. Again. Same tone, same distance, no change in inflection. Just repetition. I gripped the edge of the mattress, fingers pressing into the fabric, grounding myself in something physical. Don't respond. Don't respond. Don't respond. The silence after the second time stretched longer than before. Then the voice came again, slightly closer to the center of the wall. Evan, you don't have to stay in there. That was new. The rules hadn't mentioned conversation, just the name. My heart rate spiked. It knew, not just that I was there, but that I was choosing not to respond. You can open the door. Calm, reasonable, almost reassuring. If it's locked, you can unlock it. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe through my nose, slow and controlled. The lantern flickered, just once. A small, sharp movement of the flame inside the glass. Then it steadied again. I stared at it, every part of my attention pulled toward that tiny shift. Had it almost gone out? Or was that something else? You're not supposed to stay. The voice again, closer to the door now. It had moved. I hadn't heard footsteps. No transition. It was just there now. You read the rules, didn't you? A slight pause. Then you know, this isn't right. My grip on the mattress tightened. It wasn't trying to sound threatening. It was trying to sound correct. Logical. Like it was pointing out a mistake. You turned in. That was the first one. The first what? Mistake? Rule? You don't belong here. The lantern dimmed again, slightly more this time. The edges of the room pulled inward, shadows thickening, the corners of the cabin deepening into something less defined. I felt a shift in the air. Not temperature, density, like the space itself had become heavier. You can still fix it. A soft knock, one, centered on the door. Not the three-knock pattern. Something different. An invitation. Just open the door. I didn't move. I didn't speak. The silence stretched. Then, 3 knocks. The pattern reset. Top, middle, bottom. Exactly the same as before. My breathing hitched. It was repeating the sequence, testing again, waiting for a different outcome. The lantern flickered harder this time. Twice, then steadied. I stared at it, willing it to stay lit, as if my attention alone could keep it from going out. Rule 8. If it goes out, close your eyes, count to 100. Don't move. I wasn't sure I could do that. Not with the voice, not with the knocking, not with the sense that whatever was outside was getting closer, more focused, more aware. You're making this harder than it needs to be. The voice had dropped slightly, not louder, just lower, more direct. I squeezed my eyes shut for a second, then opened them again, fixing them on the lantern. Don't respond. Don't move. Don't look. The words looped in my head, overlapping with the rules, with the sounds, with the growing pressure in the room. The knocking stopped. The voice stopped. Everything stopped. The silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't waiting. It was full. Like something had settled into place. I became aware of a faint sound inside the cabin. Not outside. Inside. A soft, almost imperceptible shift near the kitchenette. I turned my head before I could stop myself, just slightly. Enough to bring the edge of the counter into view. Nothing there, but the feeling remained. Something had changed. Not outside. In here. The lantern dimmed again, lower than before. The flame shrinking, pulling inward, like it was being suffocated by something invisible. My pulse hammered in my ears. If it goes out, close your eyes. Count to 100. I stared at it, waiting. The flame trembled, dipped, recovered, dipped again, and then it went out. Total darkness, immediate, complete. I shut my eyes instantly, even though there was nothing to see. 1, 2, 3. I counted in my head, each number deliberate, steady, trying to keep my breathing even. At 5, I heard it. Inside the cabin. A step. Soft, measured, not from the window. From somewhere within the room. I kept my eyes closed. 6, 7, 8. Another step. Closer. The floor didn't creak, didn't shift. Just the presence of movement, confirmed by the sound alone. 9, 10. My hands trembled against the mattress. 11, 12. The air felt colder now. No, not colder. Closer. Like something was occupying the space between me and the rest of the room. 13, 14. A breath. Not mine. 15. Close. Too close. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to keep counting, to not react, to not open my eyes, no matter what my instincts screamed. 16, 17. Evan, right next to me, inside the cabin. I didn't stop counting. 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. I kept my eyes shut and counted like it was the only thing holding me in place. Like if I lost the rhythm for even a second, something would change in a way I wouldn't be able to undo. 23, 24. The presence beside me didn't move away. If anything, it settled, not shifting weight, not adjusting position, just existing, fixed at a distance that felt measured. Close enough that I could sense it without touching it. Close enough that if I reached out, my hand would meet something. I didn't move. 25, 26. My breathing had gone shallow. I tried to deepen it without making sound, drawing air in slowly through my nose, letting it out just as carefully. The cabin felt smaller now. Not physically. My body knew I was in the same place, but the space had compressed, like the walls had leaned inward by a fraction. 27, 28. Another breath. Not mine. Still there. 29, 30. The voice didn't come again. That almost made it worse. 31, 32. Silence, but not empty. The kind that holds shape, that presses against your ears, that makes every internal sound, heartbeat, breath, the slight shift of fabric, feel amplified. 33, 34. My fingers had gone numb where they gripped the mattress. 35, 36. I focused on the numbers. Nothing else. 37, 38. The air shifted. Not movement exactly. More like withdrawal. Subtle. Slow. 39, 40. The presence eased back by something I couldn't measure, but could feel. The pressure near my side lessened slightly, like whatever had been there had taken a single step away. 41, 42. I didn't follow it. I didn't turn. I didn't open my eyes. 43, 44. Another step, further this time, toward the center of the room. 45, 46. The temperature, or whatever I had been interpreting as temperature, adjusted with it. The space around me, feeling marginally less occupied. 47, 48. I kept counting. 49, 50. Halfway. The hardest part wasn't staying still anymore. It was not reacting to the change. Because part of me wanted to believe it was leaving, and that was the mistake waiting to happen. 51, 52. A faint sound near the table. Wood. Light contact. 53, 54. The lantern. Something touched it. 55, 56. I held the count steady. 57, 58. No flame returned. 59, 60. The sound stopped. 61, 62. Another step. Further away. Toward the door. 63, 64. The space continued to open. Gradually. 65, 66. My shoulders loosened slightly. Without permission. I forced them still again. 67, 68. Do not move. 69, 70. The silence changed again. Lighter now. Not empty, but no longer pressed in. 71, 72. Another step, near the door. 73, 74. Nothing after that. 75, 76. I kept going. 77, 78. My sense of time had completely detached from reality. The numbers were all I had. Each one a marker, a structure holding everything together. 79, 80. I felt the urge to stop, to open my eyes early, to check. I didn't. 81, 82. Almost there. 83, 84. The cabin stayed silent. 85, 86. No voice, no movement. 87, 88. The absence of it became noticeable. 89, 90. I slowed slightly, making sure I didn't rush the last part. 91, 92. My breathing steadied. 93, 94. The air felt normal, or as close to normal as it had since I arrived. 95, 96. I reached the final stretch. 97, 98, 99, 100. I opened my eyes. Darkness. Complete. For a second I thought nothing had changed. Then, the lantern reignited. Not gradually, not flickering back to life. Just on. The same steady glow as before, filling the room instantly, restoring the shapes, the edges, the boundaries of everything around me. I didn't move right away. I scanned the room slowly. The table, the kitchenette, the door. Empty. No sign of anything inside. No indication that something had been standing inches from me just moments ago. I exhaled, a long, controlled release of breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My hands were still shaking. The cabin looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. Something had changed, not in the structure, in me. I stood up slowly, testing the space, half expecting some reaction. Nothing. The lantern remained steady. The door stayed closed. The covered window didn't move. I checked it without getting close. Just a glance. Still sealed. No light passing through. No movement behind it. I stepped back toward the center of the room. Time. I still had no idea what time it was, but it felt later. Much later. Like something had passed. Like I had crossed a point I couldn't go back to. I sat down again, this time on the floor, back against the bed, facing the door. If I had made it through that, I wasn't going to risk anything else by moving around unnecessarily. I stayed there, watching, listening, waiting. At some point, minutes, hours, I couldn't tell, the light in the cabin began to change. Not the lantern, the edges. The faintest hint of gray filtering in around the seams of the door. Sunrise. I felt it before I fully saw it. A shift in the atmosphere. A release. The kind of quiet that belongs to morning instead of night. I stood up immediately. My body ached, every joint stiff, every muscle tight from holding still for too long. I moved to the door, paused, hand on the lock. Rule 9. You may leave at sunrise. Do not leave before. I waited one more second. Then I unlocked it. The click sounded normal this time. Just a lock. Nothing more. I opened the door. Cold air rushed in. Real cold. Morning cold. Different from the night. The forest stood in front of me. Unchanged, but somehow less oppressive. Light filtered through the trees in thin, pale beams. The road was visible beyond them. No cabin glow. No unnatural stillness. Just a place in the woods. I stepped outside, turned back once. The cabin looked ordinary. Quiet. Unremarkable. Like something you could pass 100 times without noticing. There was no paper on the door. No rules. No sign that anything had happened. I walked to my car, opened the door, sat down. My phone lit up the moment I turned it on. Full signal. The time corrected instantly. 8:12 a.m. I stared at it for a second, then looked back at the cabin. It was still there, but something about it felt distant, like it didn't belong to the same version of the place anymore. I started the engine, pulled back onto the road. This time, the GPS worked. Clear route. Straight back to the highway. I didn't look back again. I drove, and the trees slowly opened up, and the road widened, and everything returned to normal. Except one thing. That night, miles away, in a hotel room with bright lights and noise from the street below, I heard it again. 3 knocks. Soft, evenly spaced, from the door. I didn't move. I didn't speak. And I kept my eyes on the window instead.